I'm so sorry, Mom. But this conference in Phoenix is mandatory. The whole marketing team has to attend, my daughter explained with what seemed like genuine regret when I told her about my brain surgery date. What she couldn't have anticipated was that my physical therapist's vacation photos would accidentally capture her boarding the Tower of Terror with her boyfriend at Disney World, 3,000 miles from the critical work event that supposedly prevented her from being by my side during the most frightening medical procedure of my life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Margaret Wilkins, and at 74 years old, I've learned that life's most profound lessons often come wrapped in its most painful disappointments. I grew up in Lakeside, a small manufacturing town in western Michigan, where my father managed the local credit union and my mother taught piano to neighborhood children. Our modest two-story colonial on Maple Avenue was filled with music, honest conversation, and an unwavering belief that family supports family, no matter what. The Wilkins always show up, my father would say whenever anyone in our extended family faced hardship. This wasn't just platitude, it was demonstrated action. When my aunt underwent cancer treatment, my parents rearranged their lives to drive her to appointments. When my cousin lost his job, our dinner table expanded to include his family every Sunday until he found new employment. This wasn't considered exceptional. It was simply what family did. My mother reinforced this value through quieter moments, teaching me to bake extra bread for elderly neighbors, ensuring I wrote thank you notes within days of receiving gifts, and modeling dependable presence during both celebrations and crises. Being there matters more than any gift you could bring, she often reminded me. People remember who showed up when it mattered. These lessons shaped my approach to family when I married Robert in 1972 after completing my nursing degree. We settled in Columbus, Ohio, where Robert's accounting position at a regional firm provided stability while I worked in the pediatric ward at University Hospital. Our daughter Jessica arrived in 1975, followed by our son Michael 3 years later. I still remember holding each of them for the first time, making silent promises to create the same foundation of unwavering support that my parents had provided for me. Throughout their childhood, I consciously implemented the family values I'd inherited, creating traditions that emphasized reliable presence during important moments. We never missed school performances regardless of work schedules, even when it meant Robert driving straight from client meetings or me arranging complex shift swaps. When Jessica earned the lead in her 6th grade production of The Wizard of Oz, I used precious vacation days to attend all 3 performances, sitting in the same front row seat each night, despite having memorized every line by the final show. We traveled hours to attend family weddings and funerals, always arriving early to help with preparations and staying late for cleanup. The children learned to pack overnight bags efficiently and complete homework in the car, understanding without explanation that these family obligations took precedence over other activities. When Jessica complained about missing a friend's birthday party for a cousin's wedding, Robert simply said, "Wilkins show up for family. That's not negotiable." And the matter was closed. When Robert's mother needed increasing care following his father's unexpected heart attack, we converted our home office into a bedroom so she could live with us during her final years. The children shared responsibility for checking on Grandma when they returned from school, reading to her when her eyesight failed, and including her in family activities despite her declining health. These weren't presented as burdens, but as natural expressions of family commitment, the practical application of values I believed would sustain them throughout their lives. This approach wasn't always convenient, but it created a foundation I believed would sustain our family through any circumstance. The children sometimes complained about the disruption to their routines or the embarrassment of having a grandmother with increasing dementia living in their home. But they also witnessed firsthand the tender care Robert and I provided during her difficult final months, the quiet dignity we maintained while helping with increasingly personal care needs, and the consistent respect we showed even when she no longer recognized us. Robert and I believed these experiences would shape their understanding of unconditional family support more powerfully than any lecture or rule could accomplish. We weren't just telling them that family supports family. We were showing them through consistent action across years of ordinary moments and extraordinary challenges. When Robert faced his own cancer diagnosis in 2008, both Jessica and Michael arranged their work and personal commitments to provide support throughout his treatment. Jessica, then working in marketing for a pharmaceutical company in Cincinnati, drove the 2 hours to Columbus every weekend. Michael, who had relocated to Seattle for a software engineering position, flew home monthly and coordinated daily video calls between visits. The relentless schedule of oncology appointments, treatment sessions, and management of increasingly debilitating side effects created a 16-month marathon of caregiving that tested everyone's endurance. Yet during this grueling period, I witnessed our children implementing the values we had modeled throughout their lives. Jessica organized a detailed calendar of medical appointments that family members divided among themselves, ensuring Robert never attended treatment alone. Michael researched clinical trials and consulted with specialists in his Seattle network, compiling information that helped us make informed decisions about treatment options. Their consistent presence during that difficult year reinforced my belief that our family values had successfully transferred to the next generation. Jessica would arrive every Friday evening with groceries and prepare meals for the weekend, often staying through Monday morning before driving directly to her office. Michael coordinated his business travel to include Columbus whenever possible, extending work trips and taking red-eye flights to maximize his time with us while maintaining his professional responsibilities. When Robert passed, despite aggressive treatment, their support continued through the funeral arrangements and early months of grief. Jessica temporarily relocated to Columbus, working remotely for 3 months while helping me sort through Robert's belongings, manage financial transitions, and adjust to life without my partner of 40 years. Her company demonstrated remarkable flexibility, allowing her to attend virtual meetings from my dining room table while handling local client visits during abbreviated trips back to Cincinnati. Michael arranged extended bereavement leave, staying for the first month after Robert's passing, before reluctantly returning to Seattle with promises of frequent visits. He called every evening during those early weeks of grief, sometimes simply sitting in virtual companionship when conversation felt too difficult. When I mentioned feeling guilty about monopolizing his evenings, he gently reminded me, "Dad would expect nothing less from me. Wilkins show up, remember?" As grief gradually evolved into a new normal, our family dynamic shifted in subtle ways I didn't immediately recognize as significant. Jessica returned to Cincinnati and her demanding marketing career, advancing quickly through promotions that required increasing travel and longer hours. Our weekly calls became less regular, often rescheduled due to work commitments. Weekend visits decreased from monthly to quarterly, though she always made appearances for holidays and birthdays. The first Thanksgiving without Robert established a new pattern. Jessica arrived late Wednesday evening and departed immediately after dinner on Thursday, explaining that Black Friday represented critical client interactions for her pharmaceutical accounts. When I expressed disappointment about her abbreviated visit, she reminded me that her career required sacrifices and suggested I focus on gratitude for whatever time she could spare from her increasingly demanding schedule. Christmas brought similar adjustments, with Jessica negotiating a precise 36-hour visit that maximized family celebration while minimizing disruption to her professional commitments. She arrived with expensive gifts and elaborate plans for our abbreviated time together, seemingly compensating for reduced presence with increased material generosity. When I gently suggested that her presence meant more than presence, she explained that her success allowed these luxuries, presenting career advancement as an alternative form of family contribution. Meanwhile, Michael established his own pattern of consistent connection despite the greater geographical distance. His weekly video calls remained dependable, and he visited every few months despite the cross-country flight. Unlike Jessica's precisely scheduled appearances, Michael's visits maintained the relaxed quality that had characterized our family gatherings during Robert's lifetime, helping with household projects, accompanying me to community events, and creating space for both conversation and comfortable silence. When I mentioned Jessica's increasing absence during one of Michael's visits, he defended his sister's career demands while gently encouraging me to adjust expectations now that we're all adults with our own lives. This perspective, that family, presence might become more flexible with adulthood, challenged the values I'd absorbed from my parents and attempted to instill in my children. The suggestion that showing up might become optional rather than fundamental seemed incongruent with everything we had practiced throughout their upbringing. Still, I tried to adapt, appreciating whatever time Jessica could spare while focusing on my own adjustments to widowhood. I expanded my volunteer work at the hospital auxiliary, joining the patient advocacy committee that helped families navigate complex medical decisions, work that honored Robert's memory while utilizing my nursing background. I found unexpected comfort in a widow support group at my church, forming friendships with women navigating similar transitions despite diverse backgrounds and circumstances. I developed deeper connections with several neighbors who had also lost spouses, establishing a weekly lunch rotation that ensured regular social contact without burdening any individual with constant companionship. These relationships provided different support than family could offer, shared understanding of specific grief experiences, and practical advice about navigating widowhood's unexpected challenges, from home maintenance decisions to holiday traditions. That required reinvention. 5 years after Robert's passing, I noticed occasional headaches that seemed different from typical tension patterns, more persistent and concentrated on one side. When they continued for several weeks despite over-the-counter medication, I mentioned them during a routine checkup with my primary physician. Her concerned expression as she examined my pupil responses prompted immediate referral to a neurologist. The subsequent weeks brought increasingly concerning developments: an MRI revealing a small mass on the right side of my brain, consultation with a neurosurgeon, and discussion of surgical options that terrified me despite my decades of nursing experience. The diagnosis, a meningioma, likely benign but requiring removal due to its location and growth pattern, created a surreal disconnect between my professional knowledge and personal fear. As Dr. Sharma, the neurosurgeon, explained the procedure's risks and benefits in his softly accented voice, I found myself struggling to integrate the clinical information with my emotional response. His detailed explanation of the craniotomy process, temporarily removing a section of skull to access and remove the tumor, triggered visceral fear, despite my understanding of modern surgical techniques and the procedure's relatively favorable prognosis. While any brain surgery carries risks, he explained during our consultation, meningiomas are typically benign and well-defined, making complete removal possible in most cases. The tumor's location near the motor cortex necessitates intervention before symptoms progress beyond headaches to potential weakness or seizures. The clinical rationale was clear, yet the prospect of brain surgery at 74 created profound vulnerability I hadn't experienced during previous medical challenges. When Dr. Sharma asked about my support system for the recovery period, I assured him that arrangements were being made, a statement that felt simultaneously true and incomplete as I contemplated sharing this development with my children. I called Michael first, knowing his reliable response would provide emotional grounding before the potentially more complicated conversation with Jessica. His reaction combined immediate concern with practical problem-solving, exactly the balanced support I needed. In that moment, within minutes of hearing the diagnosis, he was checking flight options while asking thoughtful questions about the surgical approach and recovery expectations. I'll arrive 2 days before surgery and stay through the initial recovery period, he explained during our video call that evening, his Seattle apartment visible in the background as he made notes on his laptop. I've already cleared 3 weeks with work. They're fully supportive of remote work for as long as needed, and I've accumulated plenty of leave time if necessary. His matter-of-fact approach to rearranging his life around my medical needs reflected exactly the values Robert and I had modeled throughout his childhood. The unquestioned prioritization of family presence during critical moments. When I expressed concern about disrupting his work projects, his response echoed his father's voice. "Some things aren't negotiable, Mom. This is one of them." When I called Jessica to share the diagnosis and surgical plan the following day, her initial response seemed appropriately concerned and supportive. "That's terrifying, Mom, but meningiomas are usually benign, right? And Columbus University Hospital has an excellent neurosurgery department." Her knowledge of medical terminology reminded me that her pharmaceutical marketing position included frequent interaction with healthcare professionals. As I explained the timeline, pre-surgical testing the following week, procedure scheduled. For June 15th, anticipated 5-day hospital stay followed by home recovery. Jessica's responses became increasingly hesitant. When I asked directly about her availability to visit during this critical time, her explanation emerged in stages rather than straightforward communication. "June is always our busiest month with the national conference," she began, referencing an annual marketing event I'd heard mentioned frequently during our increasingly sporadic calls. "I'm presenting on 2 panels this year and coordinating our entire product display." "When specifically is the conference?" I asked, hoping it might not directly conflict with the surgery date. "It's that whole middle week of June," she replied, vaguely. "Let me check the specific dates." I heard keyboard clicks before she continued. "June 13th through 17th in Phoenix. Mandatory attendance for the entire marketing division. We've been planning this for months." The timing couldn't have been worse. A direct conflict with my surgery and initial recovery. While disappointment washed through me, I tried to maintain perspective about professional obligations that had been scheduled before my medical situation developed. "That's unfortunate timing. Is there any possibility of attending partially? Or sending someone else for your presentations?" Jessica's tone shifted to something I recognized from her teenage years, slight defensiveness masking guilt. "Mom, this is a critical career opportunity. The vice president specifically requested my involvement in these panels. The entire executive team will be evaluating our department's performance." What followed was a carefully constructed explanation of professional consequences that would allegedly result from any schedule adjustment, potential promotion delays, damaged reputation with leadership, possible budget reductions for her team. Each justification built upon previous ones, creating an elaborate case for her absence during my brain surgery. "Missing this conference would effectively end my advancement opportunities," she concluded with what sounded like rehearsed certainty. "You understand the professional world. Sometimes timing is simply beyond our control." The subtle implication that my medical emergency represented inconvenient timing rather than legitimate priority created momentary speechlessness. I thought of Robert's mother's care, of Michael's current arrangement of 3 weeks away from his equally demanding career, of the countless times Robert and I had rearranged professional commitments to support family needs, all without calculating career consequences as determining factors. "I completely understand," I assured her, though something in her explanation felt rehearsed rather than spontaneous. "Your career is important. Michael will be here, and I have wonderful support from friends and neighbors. I'll call constantly for updates," she promised, relief evident in her voice. "And I'll come visit as soon as I return, maybe the weekend, after surgery when you're back home and feeling more up to company." The conversation concluded with her detailed explanation of sending a care package before surgery and arrangements for flower delivery to the hospital. These tangible gestures were presented as meaningful substitutes for physical presence, a perspective that contrasted sharply with the values I thought we shared about showing up when it truly mattered. After ending the call, I sat in my living room surrounded by photos chronicling our family history, Jessica's graduation, Michael's wedding, Robert's final birthday celebration. The consistent theme across these captured moments was our physical presence during significant life events. The justifications Jessica had offered for her absence during such a critical medical procedure felt increasingly incongruent with the values that had shaped our family narrative. That initial discomfort might have remained private concern had Michael not called the following day with unexpected information about Jessica's supposed work conference. His casual mention, "Sarah saw Jessica's boyfriend post something about vacation plans," triggered the first suspicion that would eventually lead to a painful discovery far more troubling than simple scheduling conflict. "What kind of vacation? Plans?" I asked, trying to sound merely curious rather than suddenly alert. "I'm not sure exactly," Michael replied, his tone suggesting he hadn't registered potential significance. "Sarah just mentioned seeing something on Instagram about Jessica and Mark looking forward to their trip. I assumed it was related to the Phoenix conference you mentioned." The reference to Jessica's boyfriend Mark added complexity to the situation. I knew they had been dating for approximately 2 years, a relationship Jessica described as casual but exclusive, though I had met Mark only twice during their relationship. His position as a freelance graphic designer who occasionally contracted with Jessica's pharmaceutical firm created both professional and personal connection, though Jessica rarely shared specific details about their relationship dynamics. "Probably just extending the conference into a short vacation," I suggested, maintaining casual conversation while making mental note to explore this information further after our call ended. What followed was a sequence of discoveries that would ultimately reveal Jessica's conference explanation as elaborate fiction rather than unfortunate timing. Each revelation built upon previous ones, creating an increasingly troubling picture of deliberate deception rather than legitimate professional conflict. The investigation that followed over the next week would reveal layers of deception extending beyond professional obligations, culminating in an accidental discovery that would fundamentally challenge my understanding of my daughter's character and our family's shared values. What began as disappointment about a missed surgery would evolve into profound questioning of whether the principles I had so carefully modeled had ever truly been integrated into my daughter's understanding of family commitment. The day after Michael's casual mention of Jessica's vacation plans, I found myself in an unfamiliar situation, deliberately investigating my own daughter's claims. Despite decades as a nurse where objective assessment was professional standard, applying these skills to family relationships felt uncomfortable yet necessary. Something about Jessica's elaborate explanation regarding the Phoenix conference had triggered quiet alarm, and Michael's inadvertent reference to vacation plans had transformed vague concern into specific suspicion. My investigation began with basic verification any parent might attempt. I searched online for Pharmaceutical Marketing Conference Phoenix June, expecting to find details about the event Jessica had described so specifically. The search returned several industry gatherings, but none matching her described dates or location. Expanding the search parameters produced similar results. While several pharmaceutical conferences were scheduled throughout the summer months, none aligned with the Phoenix event Jessica had claimed was mandatory attendance. This initial discovery, that the conference might not exist as described, created profound discomfort. I reminded myself that simple explanations might apply. Perhaps she had misstated the conference name, confused dates, or described an internal company event not publicly listed. Before drawing conclusions, more information was necessary. My next approach involved seemingly casual conversation. I called Jessica the following evening, deliberately keeping my tone relaxed as I asked about conference preparations. "I was thinking about your Phoenix presentation while arranging my surgery details," I mentioned. "What topics are you covering again?" Jessica's response came with minimal hesitation, a detailed explanation of pharmaceutical marketing strategies for elderly patients and digital engagement approaches for medical professionals. Her confidence seemed genuine, the subject matter aligning with her professional expertise. Yet something in her delivery reminded me of her high school debate performances, polished, convincing, and occasionally rehearsed beyond actual knowledge. The conference sounds impressive, I continued conversationally. What's it called again? I'd like to look up the agenda, just to better understand what you're presenting. A brief pause preceded her answer. It's the National Pharmaceutical Marketing Summit, she replied. But the agenda isn't public. It's an internal industry event, invitation only for verified professionals. Security concerns about pharmaceutical marketing strategies, you understand. The explanation seemed plausible, yet conveniently unverifiable. A pattern I recognized from patients creating elaborate justifications for medication, non-compliance, or symptom inconsistencies. During my nursing career, I'd developed sensitivity to explanations that expanded to block verification attempts. Jessica's description contained this precise quality, each detail seemingly designed to prevent simple confirmation. That makes sense, I responded, maintaining our conversational tone. Will Mark be joining you in Phoenix? Might be nice to extend it into a short vacation after your presentations finish. Mark has his own work commitments, she answered smoothly. You know how freelance design works, feast or famine. He can't afford to turn down projects right now, especially with summer being his busiest season. This explanation directly contradicted Michael's casual mention of vacation plans involving both Jessica and Mark. While this discrepancy could have innocent explanation, perhaps Mark had subsequently rearranged his schedule, the contradiction added another concerning element requiring verification. Before pursuing further investigation, I performed honest self-assessment about my motivations. Was I seeking confirmation of deception, or merely thorough understanding of the situation? The distinction mattered. Investigation motivated by suspicion often produces evidence supporting predetermined conclusions. I reminded myself that misunderstanding remained possible, and that assuming positive intent represented both kindness and wisdom. Yet the specific nature of Jessica's claims, a precisely dated conference with particular presentation responsibilities, created objectively verifiable statements. Truth in this situation wasn't subjective interpretation, but factual reality. Either the conference existed as described, or it didn't. This understanding allowed me to proceed with investigation focused on verification rather than accusation. My nursing background had taught me that indirect sources often provide more objective information than direct questioning of someone potentially misrepresenting facts. This principle guided my next investigative step, contacting a pharmaceutical sales representative I knew through my hospital volunteer work. Linda had worked in the industry for over 20 years and maintained extensive professional networks across multiple companies. I'm wondering about the National Pharmaceutical Marketing Summit in Phoenix next month, I mentioned during our scheduled coffee meeting, presenting the inquiry as casual interest. My daughter's presenting, and I'm trying to understand more about these industry events. Linda's confused expression provided immediate information. The Marketing Summit? That's held in October in Chicago, not June in Phoenix, has been for the past 15 years, and it's called the International Pharmaceutical Marketing Conference. There isn't a national summit that I'm aware of. This confirmation that the specifically named event didn't exist as described created undeniable evidence of misrepresentation. While Jessica might have confused conference names or details, the complete non-existence of her described event suggested deliberate fabrication rather than innocent miscommunication. Maybe I misunderstood the name, I suggested, giving Jessica benefit of doubt even in her absence. She mentioned pharmaceutical marketing presentations in Phoenix from June 13th through 17th. Does that match any industry event you know about? Linda considered this carefully, genuinely trying to reconcile the information. There's nothing significant in Phoenix those dates. The major June event is in San Diego the following week, the Western Regional Healthcare Marketing Symposium. But that's primarily healthcare systems and insurance providers, not pharmaceutical specific. This verification from an industry professional transformed suspicion into certainty. Jessica had fabricated the conference explanation rather than declining attendance for legitimate professional obligations. This realization created both clarity and deeper questions. If no conference existed, what was Jessica actually planning during my surgery dates? And why create such elaborate deception rather than simply declining to attend? The vacation reference Michael had mentioned suddenly gained greater significance. If Jessica had planned personal travel during this period, why not simply explain that existing plans prevented her attendance? The deliberate construction of fictional professional obligations suggested she recognized that vacation would be considered insufficient justification for missing her mother's brain surgery, yet still preferred travel to family presence. This realization, that Jessica had chosen to lie rather than either cancel vacation plans or acknowledge prioritizing personal enjoyment over family support, created deeper hurt than her planned absence alone would have caused. The elaborate deception suggested not merely scheduling conflict, but deliberate value choice accompanied by willingness to manipulate through fabrication. Still, conclusive evidence required confirmation beyond industry verification. Perhaps Jessica's company had created a company-specific event using similar terminology. My next investigative step involved another indirect approach, contacting Jessica's assistant Amy, whom I'd met during a previous visit to her Cincinnati office. "I'm trying to send Jessica something for her Phoenix presentation," I explained when Amy answered my call, but realized I'm not entirely clear on the conference hotel details. "Could you confirm where she'll be staying during the marketing summit?" Amy's momentary confusion paralleled Linda's earlier reaction. "Phoenix presentation? There's nothing on her calendar about Phoenix. The only June travel I'm showing is her vacation time from the 12th through the 19th. She's completely off-grid those dates. Personal time? No work contact." This confirmation, from Jessica's own assistant, provided irrefutable evidence of deliberate deception. Not only did the conference not exist within the pharmaceutical industry, but Jessica had formally scheduled vacation during precisely the dates she had described as mandatory professional obligation. The fabrication was complete and intentional, designed specifically to justify absence during my surgery while preventing verification. With this confirmed deception established, I faced difficult decisions about appropriate response. Confronting Jessica immediately might create defensive reaction and permanent relationship damage. Yet proceeding as though unaware of her deception felt dishonest and potentially enabling of values directly contradicting what Robert and I had worked so diligently to instill. Before determining response, I sought final verification about the actual nature of Jessica's plans, understanding the complete situation before taking any action. This investigation path led to social media platforms I rarely utilized, but recognized as potential information sources. Mark's Instagram account, which Jessica had once mentioned during casual conversation, provided unexpected confirmation through public photos and comments. Though I had minimal social media experience, the platform's public access allowed basic navigation to his profile, where recent posts included anticipatory comments about their upcoming vacation. T-9 days until Disney magic with my favorite person. Jess Wilkins can't wait to tackle Tower of Terror together. Vacation planning. Adult Disney fun. The post, dated 4 days earlier, tagged Jessica's account and clearly indicated planned Disney World vacation during precisely the dates she had claimed mandatory conference attendance in Phoenix. Comments from friends referenced their planned trip, with Jessica herself responding to several with excited anticipation about specific attractions and experiences they had scheduled. This discovery eliminated any possibility of misunderstanding or miscommunication. Jessica had deliberately fabricated professional obligations to justify choosing a Disney World vacation with her boyfriend over being present for her mother's brain surgery. The deception was neither accidental nor subject to interpretation. It represented calculated choice to prioritize entertainment over family support during critical medical crisis. The complete picture now emerged with painful clarity. Jessica had scheduled vacation months earlier, received news of my surgery that directly conflicted with these plans, and chose to maintain her vacation while creating elaborate fiction about professional obligations to justify her absence. This choice reflected value priorities fundamentally different from what I believed we shared as family, directly contradicting the Wilkins always show up principle that had guided our family through previous crises. As this realization settled, I experienced complex emotional response. Disappointment about her absence during my surgery, hurt regarding her willingness to deceive rather than have difficult conversation about priorities, and deeper questioning about whether she had ever truly integrated the family values Robert and I had attempted to model throughout her life. These emotions required processing before determining appropriate response. The discovery occurred exactly 1 week before my scheduled surgery, creating temporal pressure regarding any potential confrontation. Immediate conflict might create additional stress during already challenging medical preparation, yet proceeding without addressing the deception felt fundamentally dishonest. In this difficult moment, I turned to the person who had consistently demonstrated the family values I cherished, Michael, whose immediate rearrangement of life to support my surgery reflected exactly the priorities Jessica's choices had rejected. After confirming his privacy during our video call, I shared the complete discovery process and ultimate confirmation of Jessica's Disney World plans. Michael's expression shifted from surprise to disappointment to controlled anger as I related each verification step and final social media confirmation. When I finished, he sat quietly for several moments before responding with measured words that carried unmistakable emotion. I'm trying to understand how anyone could choose roller coasters over being there when their mother's skull is being opened, he said finally, his voice tight with controlled feeling, especially after everything you and Dad sacrificed when we were growing up. After everything you taught us about showing up when it matters. His articulation, framing the situation in starkest terms rather than softening reality with euphemism, captured precisely what made Jessica's choice so painful. The contrast between Disney entertainment and life-threatening brain surgery created almost incomprehensible priority inversion that defied explanation through any value system resembling what we had practiced as family. "What are you thinking about doing?" Michael asked after we had both processed initial reactions. "Do you want me to talk with her?" This offer, to manage difficult confrontation on my behalf, exemplified Michael's consistent willingness to support beyond convenience. Yet, the situation required my direct engagement rather than delegated conflict management. "I need to handle this myself," I replied after consideration. "But I'm struggling with timing. Confrontation now adds stress before surgery, yet pretending, I don't know, feels dishonest, especially when she calls with fictional conference updates." Michael nodded thoughtfully. "What about addressing it after surgery? Let her maintain the fiction for now, focus on your procedure and initial recovery, then address it when you're medically stable. That prioritizes your health while still ensuring the situation doesn't remain permanently unaddressed." This approach, temporarily setting aside justified confrontation to prioritize medical stability, reflected wisdom I recognized immediately. My surgical preparation included strict stress management requirements, with emotional distress potentially complicating recovery outcomes. Deferring confrontation represented prudent medical decision rather than conflict avoidance. "That makes sense," I acknowledged, feeling unexpected relief at postponing difficult conversation until after medical stability. "I'll maintain normal communication without indicating awareness of her actual plans. After recovery, we can address the deeper issues her choices reveal." This decision, strategically timing necessary confrontation rather than avoiding it entirely. Balanced, immediate medical priorities with longer-term relationship honesty. It allowed focusing on surgical preparation without additional emotional complications, while ensuring eventual accountability for choices that revealed concerning value disparities. With this approach determined, I continued normal pre-surgical preparation, completing medical testing, arranging household management during hospitalization, and finalizing recovery support details with my neighbor Barbara and church community volunteers. Michael arrived 5 days before surgery as planned, immediately implementing practical support that reinforced the family values his sister had apparently rejected. Jessica maintained her fictional conference narrative through daily texts, sending elaborately detailed updates about Phoenix weather, presentation preparations, and supposed colleague interactions. Each message represented additional fabrication layers, demonstrating commitment to deception that might have impressed had it not revealed such troubling character implications. Just finished my slide review with the VP. One typical message. Reported. He suggested some minor changes, but overall felt the presentation was exactly what they needed. Phoenix is brutally hot, 110 degrees today, grateful for air conditioning between conference sessions. These messages, creating entirely fictional professional narrative while actually enjoying Disney World attractions, required responding without revealing awareness of their fraudulent nature. My replies maintained simple appreciation for updates, while avoiding specific reference to her fabricated conference details. Thinking of you, I would respond. Michael has everything organized here for tomorrow's procedure. Doctor says prognosis remains positive. This limited engagement, neither confronting deception nor actively participating in fictional narrative, preserved both my integrity and strategic decision to postpone confrontation until after medical recovery. It represented uncomfortable but necessary communication approach, given complex circumstances and medical priorities. The evening before surgery, Jessica's deception reached peak elaboration. She called from what she claimed was her Phoenix hotel room, creating detailed description of conference preparations while background sounds suggested very different environment. The opening reception just finished, she explained, voice slightly elevated against background music and crowd noise. Everyone's networking before tomorrow's sessions begin. The Arizona Convention Center is massive. I've already walked miles between meeting rooms. As she spoke, I detected distinctive sounds inconsistent with professional conference environment. Distant roller coaster screams, children's excited voices, and distinctive musical themes immediately recognizable from television advertisements. The unmistakable Disney World ambiance created surreal disconnect between her described location and actual surroundings, a contrast so obvious that maintaining the fiction required either remarkable confidence or complete disregard for detection. Possibility. It sounds busy there, I responded neutrally, maintaining our agreed approach of postponing confrontation. Michael and I have everything prepared for tomorrow. The surgical team called with final instructions, and Barbara will stay with Michael at the hospital during the procedure. I wish I could be there, Jessica replied, her voice carrying practiced regret that once might have seemed genuine before knowledge of her actual location revealed its performative nature. But I'm representing the entire division here. The VP specifically mentioned how critical these presentations are for our department's standing. This continued elaboration, adding fictional executive validation to justify Disney World attendance over brain surgery support, demonstrated commitment to deception that surpassed simple scheduling conflict into concerning character territory. The willingness to create increasingly complex fabrication rather than acknowledge actual priorities suggested values fundamentally misaligned with what I believed our family represented. I understand, I responded simply, choosing minimal engagement rather than either confrontation or active participation in her fictional narrative. Michael suggested we video call from the hospital tomorrow if you'd like to see me before surgery. That would be great, she agreed quickly. My morning presentation ends at 11 WA Arizona time. I could call around 2 WA your time. Would that work with the surgical schedule? The proposed timing, carefully calculated to align with her fictional presentation schedule while actually representing planned break between Disney attractions, demonstrated remarkable commitment to maintaining deception with precise continuity. Each fabricated detail connected logically to previous ones, creating comprehensive fictional narrative that might have been impressive had it not been constructed specifically to justify abandoning family responsibility during medical crisis. That should work, I confirmed. The procedure is scheduled for 3:30. As our call concluded with Jessica's elaborate descriptions of planned conference sessions and promises to check in constantly during surgery day, I experienced momentary doubt about our decision to postpone confrontation. The extent of her ongoing deception, multiple daily fabrications requiring significant creative effort, suggested concerning comfort with dishonesty that extended beyond simple scheduling conflict into troubling character implications. Yet, the medical reality remained unchanged. Brain surgery required minimal emotional stress during preparation and initial recovery. Confrontation that might trigger significant family conflict could potentially impact surgical outcomes or recovery. Trajectory. Michael's suggested approach, maintaining temporary strategic silence until medical stability permitted addressing deeper issues, still represented wisest course despite uncomfortable participation in Jessica's fictional narrative. After ending the call, I sat quietly in my living room, processing the remarkable contrast between my children's responses to identical situation. Michael had rearranged his entire life to provide 3 weeks of dedicated support, while Jessica had created elaborate deception to justify Disney World attendance over brain surgery support. This stark difference couldn't be explained by simple scheduling conflicts or professional disparities. It represented fundamental value divergence about what family means and when presence matters. "You okay?" Michael asked, entering the room with evening tea he had prepared. Another small gesture of consistent support that highlighted his sister's absence. That sounded like quite a performance. "It was comprehensive," I acknowledged, accepting the tea gratefully. Disney World apparently sounds remarkably similar to pharmaceutical conferences when described with sufficient conviction. My attempt at humor masked deeper hurt that Michael immediately recognized, sitting beside me with quiet understanding that required no explanation. We both understood that Jessica's choices reflected values neither of us recognized from our shared upbringing, priorities that contradicted everything Robert and I had attempted to model throughout their childhood. "I keep wondering where we went wrong," I admitted after several quiet moments. "What did we fail to communicate or demonstrate that would allow her to make this choice without apparent conflict or hesitation?" Michael considered this thoughtfully before responding. "I don't think this reflects parenting failure, Mom. Jessica and I received identical upbringing with consistent modeling of showing up when it matters. The difference represents her choices, not your influence. Some people simply don't integrate the values they're raised with. They select different priorities despite clear examples. This perspective, framing Jessica's behavior as personal choice rather than parental failure, offered important reframing of my instinctive self-blame. While parents influence character development, adult children ultimately make independent value choices that may diverge from familial examples. Jessica had chosen priorities fundamentally different from those Robert and I had demonstrated throughout her upbringing, a painful reality that reflected her decisions rather than our modeling inadequacy. "Tomorrow focuses only on successful surgery," Michael continued, gently redirecting attention to immediate priorities. "Everything else can wait until you're recovered. Jessica's choices are hers to explain when the time comes." This reminder, maintaining focus on medical needs, rather than relationship complications, reinforced the wisdom of postponing confrontation until after surgical recovery. Whatever Jessica's justifications might eventually include, Addressing them required health stability that tomorrow's procedure would hopefully establish. As we reviewed final surgical preparations and evening medication instructions, I maintained outward focus on medical priorities while inwardly processing profound questions about family connections. The investigation had revealed information extending beyond simple scheduling priorities into deeply concerning character implications, realities that would eventually require direct address regardless of potential relationship consequences. Yet, those difficult conversations belonged to recovery period rather than surgical preparation. For now, focusing on immediate medical needs represented both practical necessity and emotional wisdom. The deeper questions Jessica's choices raised, about values, honesty, and familial obligation, would remain for future resolution when physical stability permitted addressing painful relationship realities. What I couldn't possibly anticipate, as I prepared for next day's brain surgery, was that Jessica's elaborate deception would collapse dramatically through completely unexpected circumstances. An accidental discovery that would transform planned private confrontation into unavoidable public revelation. The careful planning about post-recovery discussion would soon be rendered irrelevant by coincidences so improbable they would have seemed contrived in fiction, yet would unfold with painful reality in the coming days. The path to this unexpected revelation began taking shape even as I completed final surgical preparations. Connections forming between seemingly unrelated individuals that would ultimately expose Jessica's Disney World presence through channels none of us could have anticipated. The investigation I had conducted would prove unnecessary in the face of accidental discovery so public and irrefutable that no planned confrontation could match its impact. As I finally prepared for sleep before tomorrow's procedure, I remained completely unaware that the careful strategies Michael and I had developed for addressing Jessica's deception would soon be rendered entirely obsolete by circumstances beyond anyone's control or anticipation. The discovery that would reveal my daughter's true location during my brain surgery was already developing through coincidental connections that would soon create unavoidable public exposure. No amount of planning could have designed or prevented. Ciao. Morning of my surgery arrived with the peculiar calm that often precedes significant medical procedures. A strange quietness where ordinary concerns temporarily recede against the backdrop of more consequential matters. Michael had prepared breakfast I couldn't eat due to pre-surgical restrictions, instead sipping approved clear liquids while we reviewed the day's carefully organized schedule. Dr. Sharma wants us at the hospital by 1 Babalar for pre-surgical preparation, Michael noted, consulting the detailed timeline he had created in his characteristically methodical fashion. That gives us about 4 hours before the actual procedure. Barbara will meet us there to provide additional support and serve as secondary contact person during surgery. His organized approach, managing practical details to minimize my need for logistical thinking, exemplified exactly the support that made presence so valuable during medical crises. Beyond emotional comfort, his physical presence provided concrete assistance that reduced stress during an already challenging experience. Jessica mentioned calling around 2 hours, I reminded him, maintaining our agreement to proceed as though unaware of her actual location. She'll presumably be between her fictional conference sessions at that point. Michael nodded, his expression revealing brief frustration before returning to neutral composure. I'll make sure you have privacy for the call. Barbara mentioned wanting to speak with the charge nurse about post-operative visiting procedures anyway. As we completed final home preparations, securing doors, adjusting thermostats, confirming that neighbors would collect mail, I experienced momentary sadness about Jessica's absence during these ordinary but significant moments. The practical acts of preparing home for extended absence carried emotional weight that highlighted the importance of supportive presence during transitions, precisely the value her Disney World priority choice had rejected. We arrived at University Hospital exactly at 1 Nayai. navigating familiar corridors that looked different through patient perspective rather than professional lens. Despite 3 decades working in this institution before retirement, the experience of entering as patient rather than staff member created disorienting role reversal that Michael recognized without explanation. "Strange being on this side of things?" he asked gently as we approached the neurosurgical unit where I had occasionally floated during staffing shortages, but never imagined becoming a patient. "Perspective shifts completely," I acknowledged. Details I never noticed as staff suddenly seem significant. The slight antiseptic smell, the particular quality of institutional lighting, the subtle differences in how people speak to patients versus colleagues. The admission process proceeded efficiently through familiar stations: registration confirming insurance details, initial vital signs assessment establishing baseline measurements, and placement in pre-surgical preparation. Room where Barbara joined us moments after our arrival. Her warm hug and reassuring presence reinforced the value of chosen family alongside biological connections, the network of meaningful relationships that provide essential support during challenging circumstances. Michael showed me how to use the surgical tracking system, she explained, displaying the hospital's patient monitoring application on her phone. "I'll coordinate updates with your church group throughout the procedure." This thoughtful arrangement, ensuring wider support network would receive timely information, demonstrated how presence extends beyond physical attendance into practical support systems that reduce stress for everyone involved. Barbara's willingness to serve as communication coordinator would allow Michael to focus entirely on immediate medical updates rather than managing multiple information channels during an already stressful experience. As nurses completed preliminary assessments and initiated IV access, the pre-surgical preparation unfolded through standard protocols familiar from my nursing career, yet strange from patient perspective. Each step, confirmation of surgical site, verification of medication history, explanation of anesthesia procedures, carried different significance when applied to my own body rather than patients I had previously attended. Approximately 45 minutes into this preparation process, my primary nurse Angela mentioned recognizing me from previous professional interaction. "You precepted me during my first pediatric rotation," she recalled, while carefully documenting initial assessment findings. "Your patience with new nurses made such difference during those stressful early months." This unexpected connection, former student now providing care during my vulnerable moment, created powerful reminder of nursing's interconnected community. Angela's competent, confident practice demonstrated how professional knowledge transfers across generations, creating continuity that transcends individual careers into collective healing tradition. "I'm glad to have familiar faces today," I acknowledged, genuinely appreciative of this unexpected connection during an inherently frightening experience. "It makes the role reversal slightly less disorienting." Angela smiled warmly while continuing her methodical preparation work. "My daughter Melissa works here now too, 3rd generation of nurses in our family. She's in physical therapy now, but started in surgical recovery like her grandmother." This casual mention, referencing her daughter's physical therapy position, would later prove critically significant through connections none of us could have anticipated during this ordinary pre-surgical conversation. The seemingly incidental reference would ultimately create path to Jessica's exposure through completely unexpected channels beyond anyone's control or planning. As 2 hours approached, the time Jessica had scheduled for her pre-surgical video call, Michael ensured the room was prepared for private conversation, while Barbara strategically departed for her planned discussion with the charge nurse. This coordinated effort to provide communication space reflected their mutual understanding of family dynamics despite complete unawareness of Jessica's actual circumstances or location. When Jessica's video call connected at precisely 2:03, the carefully constructed fiction continued with remarkable commitment to detailed continuity. She appeared on screen in what seemed designed to resemble hotel surroundings, positioned before nondescript beige wall that could plausibly represent conference accommodation. Her business attire, conservative blazer visible on screen, suggested professional context rather than theme park attendance. "Mom, you look good," she began with seemingly genuine warmth contradicted by her deliberate absence. "How are you feeling about everything? Is the surgical team inspiring confidence?" The questions themselves were appropriate and caring, creating painful contrast with the knowledge of her actual priority choices. Her sincere-sounding concern, while voluntarily absent during critical medical procedure, demonstrated remarkable compartmentalization, apparent emotional connection without corresponding behavioral commitment. "The team seems excellent," I responded, maintaining our agreed approach of normal conversation without confrontation. "Dr. Sharma has impressive credentials, and the nursing staff includes someone I actually trained years ago. Michael and Barbara have everything organized for recovery period." "That's wonderful," Jessica replied, her expression conveying practiced empathy that once might have seemed genuine before knowledge of her Disney World location revealed its performative nature. "I wish circumstances were different with this conference. The timing couldn't possibly be worse." This continued reference to fictional professional obligations, maintaining elaborate deception rather than acknowledging actual recreational priority, created surreal conversation dynamic where surface interaction proceeded normally, while fundamental dishonesty remained unaddressed. The careful fabrication extended to background management, with Jessica apparently having selected location that minimized theme park indicators that might undermine her conference narrative. "How was your presentation this morning?" I asked. The question itself participating in her fiction while providing opportunity to observe how she maintained narrative consistency under direct inquiry. "It went surprisingly well," she responded without hesitation, launching into detailed description of entirely fictional professional event. The audience was particularly engaged during the digital marketing segment. Several competitors asked specific questions about our approach to physician engagement metrics. Always a good sign that your strategies are being noticed. The fluency with which she created these detailed fabrications, specific enough to seem authentic while vague enough to prevent verification, demonstrated concerning comfort with deception that extended beyond simple white lies into elaborate fictional narrative construction. Each fabricated detail connected logically to previous ones, creating comprehensive alternate reality that might have been impressive had it not been constructed specifically to justify prioritizing Disney World over brain surgery support. Our conversation continued through expected pre-surgical topics, procedural timing, recovery expectations, follow-up arrangements. Jessica maintained consistent fictional professional context without apparent difficulty or hesitation. The ease with which she sustained this comprehensive deception suggested either practice skill with dishonesty or compartmentalization so complete that the fabrication felt subjectively valid despite objective falsehood. "I'll be thinking about you constantly during the procedure," she assured me as our conversation concluded, her expression conveying what appeared as genuine concern. "I've arranged for breaks between conference sessions to check Michael's updates through the tracking." These assurances, promising attentiveness from fabricated professional context while actually planning theme park attendance during my brain surgery, represented perhaps the most troubling aspect of her deception. The willingness to create elaborate fiction rather than acknowledge actual priorities suggested values fundamentally misaligned with what Robert and I had attempted to instill throughout her upbringing. "Thank you for calling," I responded simply, maintaining our temporary strategy of postponing confrontation until after recovery. "I appreciate hearing your voice before heading into surgery." After disconnecting, Michael returned with Barbara, both offering supportive presence as final surgical preparation accelerated toward procedure time. Neither asked about Jessica's call, respecting private conversation while focusing attention on immediate medical priorities rather than family complications that would require future resolution. The remaining pre-surgical process unfolded through standard protocols: surgical consent verification, anesthesia consultation, final vital signs assessment, followed by transport to operating room where my last conscious memory would be the bright surgical lights and anesthesiologist's gentle voice counting backward from 10. Whatever occurred during the next 5 hours would exist only in surgical records and others' recollections, rather than personal memory. I awakened in recovery area to Michael's concerned face and the disorienting sensations of post-anesthesia, emergence, fragmentary awareness punctuated by consciousness gaps that gradually resolved into more continuous perception. The neurosurgeon's brief appearance confirmed successful tumor removal, with preliminary pathology suggesting benign meningioma, as initially suspected, positive outcome that represented best possible scenario despite inherently serious procedure. Everything went as planned, Michael assured me during these early recovery moments, his voice providing orientation during confusion that typically follows major neurosurgical procedures. Dr. Sharma was very pleased with tumor margins and complete resection. You're doing exactly as expected at this stage. The next 12 hours passed in semi-consciousness as I transitioned from recovery unit to neurosurgical floor, where specialized monitoring would continue throughout initial post-operative period. Michael remained constantly present, sleeping uncomfortably in bedside recliner while maintaining communication with support network through Barbara's coordinated updates. By morning following surgery, my awareness had sufficiently improved to register slightly increased room activity, medical team rounds, nursing shift changes, nutrition services delivering appropriate post-surgical diet. Through this standard post-operative progression, Michael maintained supportive presence while managing practical details that might otherwise have created unnecessary stress during critical recovery period. Approximately 30 hours after surgery, while Michael briefly stepped out for hospital cafeteria break, my nurse Angela entered for routine assessment, accompanied by younger woman she introduced as Melissa, the daughter she had mentioned during pre-surgical preparation. "Mom mentioned caring for you before surgery," Melissa explained while assisting with standard neurological assessment protocols. "I normally work outpatient physical therapy, but we're cross-covering inpatient units during staff shortage this week." The efficiency with which they completed necessary evaluations demonstrated professional coordination developed through shared nursing background despite different specialization areas. Their gentle competence provided reassurance during inherently vulnerable post-surgical state, creating safety through skilled assessment that detected subtle neurological indicators laypeople might miss. As they concluded standard evaluation, Melissa's casual comment initiated sequence that would ultimately unravel Jessica's elaborate deception through completely unexpected coincidence. "Your surgical outcome looks excellent so far," she noted while documenting assessment findings. "Disney will need to wait a while, but you should have good recovery trajectory based on initial presentation." The reference, apparently assuming, my surgery had postponed planned Disney vacation rather than my daughter choosing Disney over surgical support, created momentary confusion Michael noticed upon returning during this exchange. "I think you might have Mom confused with another patient," he suggested gently. "We don't have any Disney plans." Melissa looked briefly confused before apologetic understanding crossed her expression. "I'm so sorry. I definitely mixed up patients. We have several post-surgical cases today, and I confused your mother with someone else." The matter might have ended with this simple clarification had Melissa not added seemingly casual detail while preparing to leave. Vacation plans get complicated. Around medical issues. I just returned from Orlando myself. Recognized someone from my hometown while riding Tower of Terror yesterday. Small world coincidences happen constantly at Disney. This reference, specifically mentioning Tower of Terror attraction referenced in Mark's Instagram post about vacation with Jessica, created immediate attention shift Michael couldn't completely conceal despite efforts to maintain neutral expression. Before he could respond appropriately, my post-surgical medication haze prompted unexpected direct question. "Tower of Terror at Disney World?" I asked. Cognitive filters temporarily compromised by pain medication and post-surgical state. Was it possibly my daughter Jessica you recognized there? With her boyfriend Mark? The direct question, bypassing our carefully planned postponement of confrontation, created immediate atmospheric shift as Melissa's expression transformed from professional composure to uncomfortable recognition. Her momentary hesitation, followed by subtle glance toward her mother, conveyed immediate confirmation more clearly than any verbal response could have communicated. "I did recognize someone from Columbus," she acknowledged carefully. "Professional. Training evidently suggesting minimal involvement in a parent-family situation. Jennifer Wilson's daughter from Riverside neighborhood, if I'm remembering correctly." This attempted neutral identification, using neighborhood reference rather than confirming specific identity, demonstrated appropriate professional boundaries, while failing to obscure obvious recognition Melissa's expression had already revealed. Whatever she had witnessed at Disney World clearly connected to Jessica, despite her careful attempt to avoid direct confirmation. "Jessica Wilkins," I clarified directly. Medication-reduced inhibition creating unprecedented directness. "Wearing Mickey ears, possibly? With tall boyfriend taking photos?" Michael placed gentle hand on my arm, silently suggesting moderation while recognizing futility of maintaining our planned postponement given current circumstances. The direct questioning, bypassing usual social filters, created unavoidable situation necessitating truthful response despite potential awkwardness for healthcare providers unexpectedly involved in family revelation. Melissa's professional training apparently struggled against ethical discomfort about withholding obviously relevant information. After brief internal conflict visible in her expression, she nodded slightly while maintaining careful verbal boundaries. "I did recognize someone matching that description at Tower of Terror yesterday afternoon," she confirmed quietly. "With companion taking photographs that included the person wearing celebration button indicating birthday vacation. This specific detail, celebration button for birthday vacation, provided irrefutable confirmation beyond general presence observation. The precise description established Jessica's Disney World attendance as definitive fact rather than potential misidentification, creating undeniable evidence through completely unexpected coincidental connection no one could have possibly anticipated or planned. "Thank you for your honesty," Michael responded, demonstrating remarkable composure while acknowledging Melissa's uncomfortable position in this unexpected revelation. "We appreciate your professionalism and thoroughness with Mom's care." This deliberate redirection, shifting focus from unexpected Disney World confirmation to appropriate healthcare appreciation, provided graceful exit opportunity Melissa and Angela immediately recognized and utilized, completing their documentation quickly before departing with professional well wishes that carefully avoided further reference to the inadvertent revelation. After their departure, Michael closed the door before turning toward me with expression combining concern and recognition that our careful confrontation postponement had been rendered irrelevant by circumstance beyond anyone's control. The accidental discovery through healthcare providers' vacation coincidence had created immediate confirmation that transformed our planned approach into irrelevant strategy, superseded by unexpected revelation. "I'm sorry that happened now," he said quietly, genuine concern about timing evident in his expression. "We had agreed to postpone this discussion until after your recovery stabilized." "Coincidence has its own timeline," I observed, the philosophical perspective possibly influenced by medication, though accurately reflecting situation's unexpected development. Some revelations apparently won't wait for convenient scheduling. This inadvertent humor, finding momentary lightness in situation's absurd coincidental nature, created brief connection point amid otherwise difficult realization that Jessica's elaborate deception had now been confirmed through objective third-party observation. Whatever explanations or justifications she might eventually offer, her Disney World presence during my brain surgery now existed as independently verified, fact rather than suspected probability. "What happens now?" Michael asked practically, recognizing that our carefully planned post-recovery confrontation strategy had been rendered obsolete by circumstance. Do we contact Jessica immediately or maintain original approach until you're further recovered? This practical question, addressing immediate response options rather than emotional implications, demonstrated Michael's consistent focus on constructive problem-solving, despite understandable anger regarding his sister's choices. Rather than reactive outrage, he maintained solution-oriented perspective that prioritized my well-being above justified indignation about Jessica's behavior. Before I could respond, Jessica's promised conference break update text arrived with continued fictional narrative elaboration that created particularly jarring contrast against newly confirmed reality. Stepping between sessions to check on you, her message read. How are you feeling post-surgery? Conference attendees keep asking about you. Several pharmaceutical reps know University Hospital's neurosurgery department and speak highly of their outcomes. This continued fabrication, maintaining elaborate fiction even after surgery completion when simple acknowledgement of actual location would have been possible, demonstrated concerning commitment to deception extending beyond mere absence justification into seemingly pathological narrative maintenance. Even with surgery successfully completed, Jessica apparently preferred continuing comprehensive fiction rather than acknowledging actual circumstances or choices. I think circumstances have made the decision for us, I noted, showing Michael. Her message with its continued fictional conference references. Maintaining this approach any longer feels unhealthy for everyone involved, especially with independent confirmation of reality that directly contradicts her ongoing narrative. Michael nodded agreement while considering appropriate response options. Direct confrontation during Disney vacation might provoke defensive reaction that prevents productive discussion, but continuing to participate in fiction seems equally problematic, given what we now know with certainty. This balanced assessment, recognizing challenges with both immediate confrontation and continued fiction participation, demonstrated thoughtful consideration rather than reactive decision-making. Whatever approach we selected, the situation's complexity required careful navigation rather than impulsive response despite understandable emotional reactions to Jessica's choices and ongoing deception. I think simple truth is appropriate now, I decided after consideration. Not accusatory or judgmental, but direct acknowledgement of reality that makes continued fiction unnecessary without demanding immediate explanation or justification. With this approach determined, I composed response that acknowledged reality without attacking or condemning, creating space for eventual meaningful conversation while eliminating need for further fictional elaboration. Jessica, I hope you're enjoying Disney World. Melissa, my physical therapist, recognized you at Tower of Terror yesterday. Surgery went well. Benign meningioma successfully removed. We can discuss everything after you return from vacation. This message, directly acknowledging her actual location while providing factual medical update without emotional accusation, represented balanced approach, maintaining relationship possibility, while eliminating continued participation in fiction that served no constructive purpose. By naming reality without demanding immediate justification, it created potential space for eventual meaningful conversation about priorities and values when circumstances permitted thoughtful discussion rather than reactive conflict. After sending this message, I turned phone to silent mode, prioritizing recovery needs above potential response management. Whatever Jessica's reaction might include, addressing it required physical and emotional stability that immediate post-surgical state couldn't support regardless of coincidental revelation timing. Now we focus entirely on your recovery, Michael affirmed, supporting this decision to postpone further engagement regardless of potential response. Whatever conversations need to happen can wait until you're medically stable enough to participate meaningfully. This priority clarification, maintaining focus on medical recovery rather than relationship complications, demonstrated wisdom about appropriate timing, despite circumstance-forced revelation that might otherwise have created pressure for immediate resolution. Recovery needs legitimately superseded relationship processing regardless of unexpected discovery timeline or potential response dynamics. Jessica's reaction to reality acknowledgement arrived approximately 40 minutes later, notably delayed compared to her typically immediate message responses. The single-line text contained neither explanation nor justification, but instead, minimal acknowledgement that further fiction had become impossible. "I'll call when I return from Florida." This response, neither apologetic nor defensive, but simply accepting reality exposure, provided little insight into her perspective or potential justification for choices that had prioritized Disney World over brain surgery support. The absence of immediate explanation suggested either recognition that substantive discussion required proper context or inability to formulate justification that might withstand scrutiny even in her own estimation. "At least the fiction has ended," Michael observed pragmatically. "Whatever conversation happens next will start from reality rather than continued fabrication." This perspective, finding constructive element even within difficult situation, characterized Michael's consistent approach throughout the entire experience, from immediate surgery support provision through unexpected deception revelation. His stability created foundation for my recovery that contrasted sharply with Jessica's absence and deception, highlighting through direct comparison the profound impact of presence versus absence during critical life moments. The next 5 days passed in standard post-craniotomy recovery progression. Initial intensive monitoring transitioning gradually toward increased mobility and independence as surgical site healing advanced according to expected timeline. Throughout this period, Michael maintained consistent supportive presence while coordinating wider support network through Barbara's continued communication management. Jessica maintained complete communication silence following her brief acknowledgement message, neither attempting justification nor expressing concern about surgical outcomes despite previous performative interest in recovery details. This absence, now acknowledged rather than disguised through elaborate fiction, created space for focusing entirely on physical recovery without emotional complications that premature relationship processing might have introduced. On 6th post-operative day, Dr. Sharma's morning assessment confirmed appropriate healing progression, justifying discharge planning for following day. "Your recovery is progressing exactly as expected," he noted while examining surgical site with evident satisfaction. Pathology confirms benign meningioma with complete resection margins, indicating excellent long-term prognosis without anticipated recurrence concerns. This positive medical assessment, representing best possible outcome from inherently serious procedure, created profound gratitude for skillful surgical intervention, while simultaneously highlighting Jessica's absence during this critical medical journey. The successful procedure she had chosen to miss while enjoying Disney World attractions represented literally life-altering intervention that family presence traditionally acknowledges through supportive attendance, regardless of personal inconvenience. Michael's continuous presence throughout this experience, from pre-surgical preparation through post-operative monitoring to discharge planning, demonstrated exactly the family support values Robert and I had attempted to instill in both children. His consistent prioritization of my needs above personal convenience created powerful contrast with Jessica's vacation priority that communication silence following exposure seemed to acknowledge through absence of attempted justifications. Discharge planning proceeded through standard protocols. Michael arranged home modifications Barbara had coordinated through church volunteer network, shower safety equipment, main floor sleeping arrangements, meal delivery schedule covering. Initial home recovery period. These practical support systems, created through relationships Jessica's choices had effectively devalued, demonstrated community connections that provide essential assistance during vulnerability periods when presence creates tangible difference, beyond emotional comfort. The day before scheduled discharge, Jessica's prearranged flower delivery arrived with card containing message composed before her Disney World exposure. Thinking of you constantly during recovery. Will call as soon as conference concludes to arrange immediate visit. Love always, Jessica. This message, presumably written before departure and arranged for delivery timing without anticipating exposure of its fictional premise, created jarring disconnect between planned narrative and now acknowledged reality. The continued reference to non-existent conference within physical card highlighted commitment to comprehensive deception that had extended beyond electronic communication into tangible physical elements requiring advanced planning. The flowers themselves, elaborate professional arrangement significantly more expensive than standard hospital delivery, suggested attempt to compensate through material generosity for absence that truly required presence rather than proxies. This substitution pattern, replacing showing up with sending things, reflected Jessica's apparent value divergence that Michael's consistent presence highlighted through direct behavioral contrast. The card reads like alternate reality fiction. Now, Michael observed while arranging the flowers where they would be visible without requiring active attention. Strange reading reference to non-existent conference after confirmation of actual Disney location. This observation, noting peculiar disconnect between planned deception and exposed reality, highlighted how thoroughly Jessica's fabricated narrative had collapsed through simple coincidental connection no amount of careful planning could have anticipated or prevented. The elaborate fiction maintained through multiple communication channels had ultimately proven vulnerable to ordinary life intersection beyond anyone's control. Physical therapist's vacation coinciding with location deliberately concealed through comprehensive fabrication. As discharge day arrived with standard protocols, final physician assessment, medication reconciliation, home care instruction review, I experienced conflicting emotions about returning home with only Michael's support, rather than both children's assistance during critical recovery period. While entirely sufficient from practical perspective, his sister's deliberate absence during this significant transition highlighted concerning value priorities that eventual conversation would need to address, despite potential relationship consequences. The accidental discovery that had revealed Jessica's actual location during my surgery had fundamentally altered inevitable confrontation dynamics, transforming planned private discussion into reality acknowledgement necessitated by unexpected third-party confirmation. Whatever conversation eventually occurred would proceed from established factual baseline rather than suspected deception, creating different accountability context than originally anticipated when Michael and I had planned post-recovery confrontation. Approach. As hospital discharge procedures concluded and wheelchair transport delivered me to Michael's waiting car, I reflected on the remarkable coincidence that had created this altered situation. The seemingly random connection between my physical therapist's Disney vacation and Jessica's deliberately concealed location. The statistical improbability of this specific intersection, healthcare provider recognizing patient's daughter at precise attraction mentioned in social media posts that prompted initial investigation, suggested almost narrative intervention beyond rational explanation. Ready to head home? Michael asked as he carefully helped transfer from wheelchair to car, his attentiveness demonstrating exactly the supportive presence Jessica had chosen to forfeit through priority decisions that Disney World exposure had confirmed beyond rationalization possibility. Ready, I confirmed, genuine appreciation for his unwavering support creating momentary emotional tightness despite general post-surgical numbness that medication typically induces. And profoundly grateful for your presence throughout this entire experience. As we departed hospital grounds toward home recovery that would eventually include necessary conversation with Jessica about priorities and values her choices had revealed, I recognized that the accidental discovery had created unexpected clarity despite its uncomfortable timing. Whatever justification she might eventually offer, the reality of her Disney World presence during my brain surgery had been established through objective third-party confirmation rather than investigation or accusation. This factual baseline, established through coincidence rather than confrontation, would ultimately create different conversation parameters than originally anticipated when Michael and I had planned post-recovery discussion approach. The path toward eventual understanding or resolution remained uncertain, but would proceed from acknowledged reality rather than suspected deception, distinction that might ultimately prove constructive despite uncomfortable revelation process, that circumstances beyond anyone's control had necessitated through remarkable coincidental intersection. The transition from hospital to home created both relief and new challenges as recovery continued in familiar surroundings modified for post-surgical needs. Michael had transformed my first-floor study into temporary bedroom, eliminating stair navigation concerns while maintaining privacy and comfort during initial healing. The adaptation reflected thoughtful anticipation of needs I might not have recognized myself, precisely the type of supportive presence that makes family attendance during medical crises so valuable beyond emotional reassurance. Church volunteers had implemented Barbara's carefully organized support schedule, providing daily meal delivery, transportation to follow-up appointments, and brief companionship visits that prevented isolation without creating exhaustion. This community support network, relationships cultivated through decades of reciprocal care, demonstrated how presence during others' difficulties creates foundation for assistance when personal challenges eventually arise. Throughout the first week home, Jessica maintained complete silence following her brief acknowledgement text from Disney World. Her conspicuous absence during this critical recovery period contrasted sharply with the consistent support others provided, highlighting through direct comparison the practical impact of showing up versus remaining distant during significant life challenges. 10 days after returning home, while reviewing surgical site care with Michael following shower assistance, I broached the subject we had largely avoided since the accidental Disney World discovery. "Have you heard anything from Jessica about her return timeline?" I asked, the question addressing practical planning rather than emotional implications, despite obvious connection between scheduling and eventual necessary conversation. Michael's expression suggested reluctance to introduce potential stress during recovery, but he answered directly. Her Instagram shows they returned from Disney 3 days ago. She posted photos of Tower of Terror and other attractions, though her captions carefully avoid mentioning specific timing that would connect to your surgery date. This information, that Jessica had resumed normal social media activity without acknowledging her absence during critical family medical situation, suggested either remarkable compartmentalization or deliberate avoidance of accountability for choices the Disney World exposure had confirmed beyond rationalization possibility. The continued silence following vacation completion indicated reluctance to address reality, that coincidental discovery had established through objective third-party confirmation. I imagine she's finding this situation difficult to explain even to herself, I observed, attempting perspective that recognized complexity without excusing choices that had prioritized entertainment over family support during literal brain surgery. Justifying Disney World attendance over being present for potentially life-threatening medical procedure creates cognitive dissonance that silence temporarily avoids confronting. Michael nodded thoughtfully, his expression suggesting similar consideration of psychological aspects rather than simply condemning his sister's behavior without attempting understanding. The elaborate fictional narrative suggests she recognized, at least subconsciously, that straightforward acknowledgement of vacation priority wouldn't withstand even her own ethical scrutiny. The comprehensive deception required significant effort, energy that simple truth would have rendered unnecessary. This analysis, focusing on psychological mechanisms rather than purely moral judgment, reflected nuanced perspective that sought understanding without justifying choices that conflicted with core family values we believed Jessica had internalized throughout upbringing. The compassionate assessment didn't excuse her actions but attempted comprehending motivational factors that might eventually facilitate meaningful conversation rather than purely confrontational accountability. How would you like to handle things when she eventually makes contact? Michael asked practically, maintaining solution-oriented approach that had characterized his supportive presence throughout the entire experience. Assuming she does reach out at some point, this question, addressing process rather than emotional reaction, demonstrated Michael's consistent focus on constructive paths forward, despite understandable disappointment regarding his sister's choices and subsequent avoidance. Rather than righteous indignation, he maintained perspective seeking resolution possibilities that might preserve relationship, despite profound value divergence Jessica's behavior had revealed. I think direct honesty without punitive intent represents best approach, I replied after consideration. Acknowledging reality, expressing disappointment, but focusing primarily on understanding values, her choices reflect rather than simply condemning specific actions. This orientation, seeking value clarification rather than simply expressing hurt, reflected deeper interest in understanding Jessica's internal framework beyond individual decisions her Disney prioritization and subsequent deception had revealed. If meaningful relationship repair remained possible, it required honest exploration of fundamental priorities rather than simply addressing specific behavioral choices or seeking apologies that might temporarily soothe without resolving underlying value disparities. With this approach determined, we continued recovery routines while maintaining openness to eventual contact without actively pursuing conversation before Jessica indicated readiness. This balanced stance, neither aggressive confrontation nor passive avoidance, created space for potential meaningful exchange when circumstances permitted authentic discussion rather than reactive defensiveness or performative reconciliation. 2. Weeks later, as physical recovery progressed toward increasing independence, Jessica finally initiated contact through text message requesting visit permission. Back from vacation. Would like to see you if you're feeling up to visitors. Can come tomorrow afternoon if that works. The message, acknowledging vacation rather than maintaining fictional conference narrative but offering no explanation or apology, suggested recognition that previous fabrication had collapsed while avoiding direct accountability for choices the Disney World exposure had confirmed beyond rationalization possibility. The phrasing positioned potential visit as consideration of my wellness, rather than addressing her absence during critical medical situation. After consultation with Michael, who planned to remain present during the visit while providing space, for direct conversation, I responded affirmatively with neutral wording that neither dismissed situation's significance nor created confrontational expectation. Tomorrow afternoon works. Michael will be here. Looking forward to seeing you. This response, factual without emotional loading, maintained possibility for productive conversation while establishing Michael's continued presence that would prevent potential narrative revision about what had actually occurred. His participation would ensure accountability through consistent perspective that Jessica's potential defensiveness couldn't easily dismiss or reframe. Jessica arrived the following afternoon precisely at the suggested time, her punctuality contrasting with the priority choices that had rendered her absent during critical medical crisis. She entered carrying elaborate gift basket containing recovery items, premium tea selection, organic fruit arrangement, luxury bath products, and several books from favorite authors. The expensive compilation suggested attempt to compensate through material generosity for absence that had prioritized personal enjoyment over family support during literally brain surgery. You look better than I expected, she observed after initial greeting, her expression suggesting genuine relief about recovery progression, while carefully avoiding direct reference to her absence during the medical crisis that had necessitated recovery. How are you feeling? This opening, focusing on current wellness rather than addressing her Disney World prioritization or subsequent deception, attempted establishing normalized interaction without acknowledging elephant in room, that coincidental discovery had confirmed beyond potential misunderstanding. The approach suggested hope that recovery progress might supersede necessary conversation about values her choices had revealed through prioritizing vacation over surgical support. Physically improving steadily, I replied directly, appreciating the recovery-focused question while recognizing its potential function as accountability avoidance mechanism. The emotional aspects have been more complicated, particularly processing your decision to attend Disney World during my brain surgery while creating elaborate fictional narrative about non-existent pharmaceutical conference. This response, acknowledging physical recovery while directly addressing reality, her coincidental exposure had confirmed, prevented conversation developing through avoidance patterns that might perpetuate dysfunction rather than addressing fundamental issues her choices and subsequent deception had revealed. The straightforward statement established factual baseline without accusatory tone that might provoke defensive reaction rather than meaningful exchange about underlying values. Jessica's expression shifted through several emotions. Momentary, defensiveness yielding to resignation, followed by uncomfortable acknowledgement that direct approach had rendered continued avoidance impossible. She placed the gift basket on nearby table before sitting in living room chair, positioned to create conversation triangle with Michael and me. I don't know what to say that doesn't sound terrible when stated directly, she admitted after prolonged silence, her tone suggesting recognition that standard justifications would appear obviously inadequate against literal brain surgery context. The vacation was planned months before your diagnosis, but that explanation sounds hollow even to me when considering what the surgery involved. This acknowledgement, recognizing inadequacy of timing-based justification against life-threatening medical procedure, suggested potential for meaningful conversation rather than defensive rationalization or continued avoidance. The admission that standard explanations appeared insufficient even to herself indicated self-awareness that might eventually facilitate authentic exchange about values her choices had revealed. I'm less concerned with the specific decision than understanding what values it reflects, I explained, maintaining focus on underlying priorities rather than particular actions. Choices during conflicting obligations reveal fundamental priorities. I'm trying to understand what your decision indicates about values you currently hold versus those your father and I attempted to instill throughout your upbringing. This framing, seeking value, understanding rather than simply expressing disappointment, created conversation space beyond specific incident into deeper exploration of priority frameworks that would inevitably influence future relationship possibilities. By focusing on values rather than behaviors alone, it invited meaningful exchange about fundamental orientations rather than limited discussion of particular circumstances or decisions. Jessica seemed momentarily startled by this approach, perhaps expecting emotional confrontation rather than philosophical inquiry about underlying value systems her choices indicated. After brief consideration, she responded with unexpected directness that suggested potential for authentic exchange despite obvious discomfort. I've been thinking about this constantly since Melissa recognized me at Disney, she admitted, referencing the coincidental exposure that had collapsed her elaborate fictional narrative. Trying to understand my own choices that seem indefensible when stated plainly, prioritizing vacation over being present during my mother's brain surgery. This self-reflection, acknowledging fundamental conflict between her actions and basic family values, indicated capacity for honest assessment beyond defensive justification or continued avoidance. The acknowledgement created foundation for potentially meaningful conversation about underlying priorities rather than merely addressing specific decision or subsequent deception. The truth is uncomfortable, she continued after gathering thoughts that suggested internal struggle preceding this conversation. I've gradually adopted values fundamentally different from what you and Dad emphasized throughout our upbringing. I've prioritized personal experience and professional advancement over family presence in ways that seemed reasonable in isolation, but appear starkly selfish when circumstances force direct comparison like this situation created. This admission, acknowledging Value divergence from family foundation represented remarkable self-awareness that bypassed potential defensiveness into genuine acknowledgement that her priorities had shifted fundamentally from what Robert and I had attempted instilling throughout her childhood. The recognition created possibility for authentic discussion about relationship implications rather than simply addressing individual choices or behaviors. When exactly did showing up for family during critical moments become optional rather than fundamental? I asked, seeking understanding about evolution rather than simply judging current priorities. Your presence during your father's illness and following his death suggested internalized values about family support during significant challenges. What changed between then and now? This question, exploring transformation rather than simply condemning current orientation, invited thoughtful response about developmental processes rather than defensive justification of specific choices. By acknowledging previous alignment with family values, it created space for considering gradual shifts rather than assuming fundamental character flaws or inherent selfishness. Jessica considered this carefully, her expression suggesting genuine reflection rather than reactive response. It happened gradually through professional environments that consistently rewarded individual achievement over community connection, she explained thoughtfully. Each promotion required sacrificing personal relationships for career advancement. Success repeatedly validated choosing professional opportunity over family obligation until that framework became normalized rather than exceptional. This analysis, examining systematic influence rather than attributing value shift to single decision point, demonstrated self-awareness about gradual transformation rather than sudden rejection of family principles. The perspective suggested environmental factors rather than fundamental character orientation, creating potential for reconsideration rather than permanent value divergence. Work cultures explicitly celebrated those who prioritized company needs over personal obligations, she continued, developing contextual understanding that explained rather than justified her evolving priorities. Colleagues who rescheduled family events for client emergencies received promotions while those maintaining boundaries faced limited advancement opportunities. The consistent reinforcement gradually reshaped my internal value hierarchy until professional dedication superseded family presence even during significant moments. Michael, who had remained quietly observant during our initial exchange, offered perspective that bridged understanding without excusing choices. Professional environments definitely reward sacrifice of personal commitments, he acknowledged, drawing from his own corporate experience. But ultimately, we choose which value systems deserve our allegiance. Similar career pressures exist in my industry, yet maintaining family commitment remains possible despite advancement expectations. This contribution, validating environmental influence while maintaining personal responsibility, added important dimension without creating confrontational dynamic that might prevent productive conversation. By acknowledging career pressures while highlighting choice possibility, Michael's perspective maintained accountability without dismissing contextual factors Jessica had identified as influential in her value evolution. "You're right," Jessica admitted, her expression reflecting uncomfortable recognition rather than defensive rejection. Others in my company maintain family priorities despite advancement expectations. I gradually justified increasing personal sacrifices through professional necessity narrative rather than acknowledging value choices that prioritize career advancement over family presence. This acknowledgement, accepting responsibility despite contextual influences, created foundation for potential relationship recalibration based on honest assessment rather than continued rationalization or avoidance. By recognizing choice aspects, despite environmental pressures, Jessica demonstrated capacity for authentic engagement beyond defensive positioning that might prevent meaningful connection. The Disney decision represents culmination of this gradual value shift, she continued with remarkable candor that suggested significant reflection preceding our conversation. The vacation was planned months before your diagnosis, representing reward for major account acquisition that required substantial personal sacrifice. When your surgery created direct conflict, I defaulted to prioritizing personal enjoyment over family support without conscious deliberation. The value hierarchy had already fundamentally shifted from what you and Dad had instilled. This analysis, identifying decision as manifestation of established priority pattern rather than isolated choice, demonstrated self-awareness about underlying frameworks rather than focusing solely on specific circumstance. The perspective created possibility for addressing fundamental values rather than merely reconciling particular incident through apology without deeper reconsideration. The elaborate deception suggests awareness that this choice wouldn't withstand ethical scrutiny, I observed, addressing fictional narrative without accusatory tone that might prevent productive exchange. Creating comprehensive fictional conference rather than simply acknowledging vacation plans indicates recognition that entertainment prioritization over brain surgery support violated basic values you still recognize intellectually, even if not. Following practically. Jessica nodded slowly, acknowledging truth in this assessment without defensiveness that might have derailed meaningful conversation. The fictional narrative represents attempting to reconcile irreconcilable values, she admitted. I couldn't acknowledge prioritizing Disney over your surgery without confronting fundamental ethical conflict between my current priorities and basic principles I still recognize as valid, despite not implementing practically. This level of self-awareness, recognizing internal conflict between acknowledged principles and actual priorities, suggested capacity for potential recalibration rather than permanent value divergence. The acknowledgement created foundation for relationship possibilities beyond specific incident into meaningful connection based on honest assessment rather than performative reconciliation without authentic reorientation. Where does this leave us? I asked directly, shifting toward future implications rather than continued analysis of past choices or value evolution. Understanding development patterns provides context, but doesn't automatically resolve the fundamental disconnect between family presence values and priorities your recent choices demonstrate. This question, addressing relationship implications rather than merely analyzing developmental factors, focused conversation toward constructive possibilities while acknowledging serious disconnect Jessica's Disney prioritization and subsequent deception had revealed. By looking forward, rather than simply examining past patterns, it invited consideration of potential relationship calibration based on honest assessment rather than superficial reconciliation. I'm not entirely sure, Jessica replied with unexpected vulnerability that suggested genuine uncertainty rather than defensive positioning. This situation has forced recognizing value divergence I've avoided acknowledging even to myself. The Disney choice and subsequent deception represent priorities fundamentally misaligned with principles I still recognize intellectually despite not implementing practically. This acknowledgement, accepting fundamental disconnect without immediate resolution proposal, demonstrated authenticity beyond performative reconciliation or defensive justification. By recognizing serious misalignment without premature resolution claims, Jessica created space for genuine relationship reconsideration rather than superficial harmony without authentic reorientation. Perhaps appropriate next step involves honest assessment without immediate relationship redefinition, Michael suggested, offering constructive approach that neither dismissed significance nor demanded instantaneous resolution. Acknowledging value divergence creates foundation for authentic connection based on actual priorities rather than assumed alignment that recent circumstances have demonstrated doesn't currently exist. This perspective, focusing on honest assessment rather than immediate reconciliation, provided balanced approach acknowledging reality without foreclosing future possibilities. By suggesting authentic engagement rather than performative harmony, Michael's contribution created space for meaningful relationship development beyond specific incident into potential connection based on genuine understanding rather than presumed alignment. That seems reasonable, Jessica agreed, her expression suggesting relief about potential path forward without premature resolution claims that circumstances couldn't support. Pretending immediate realignment would represent continuation of deception patterns rather than authentic engagement. Honest acknowledgement of current priorities creates foundation for whatever relationship possibilities those values can genuinely support. This approach, accepting reality assessment without immediate harmony claims, demonstrated maturity beyond defensive positioning or performative reconciliation without authentic reorientation. By acknowledging current disconnect while remaining open to potential development, Jessica created possibility for meaningful relationship calibration based on actual values rather than presumed alignment recent circumstances had demonstrated didn't currently exist. As our conversation continued through practical implications and potential future interactions, I observed transformation that extended beyond immediate situation into deeper understanding about family connections and values, transmission across generations. The painful discovery of Jessica's Disney World prioritization during my brain surgery had revealed not merely scheduling conflict, but fundamental value divergence requiring honest assessment rather than superficial harmony claims circumstances couldn't authentically support. In subsequent weeks, our relationship developed through careful recalibration based on actual priorities rather than presumed alignment. Jessica's choices had demonstrated didn't currently exist. Rather than performative closeness without authentic connection, we established interaction patterns reflecting genuine values each held while maintaining openness to potential evolution through continued honest engagement rather than pretended harmony without substantive foundation. 3 months after surgery, as physical recovery progressed toward near-complete restoration, Jessica invited Michael and me to dinner at neutral restaurant location she had selected for meaningful conversation. Continuation. The setting, private table in quiet establishment allowing uninterrupted discussion, suggested intentional creation of appropriate environment for significant exchange rather than casual interaction without substantive engagement. I've been examining value patterns beyond specific Disney decision, she began after initial greetings and brief recovery updates had established comfortable conversation baseline. Recognizing systematic priority shifts that gradually replaced family presence emphasis with professional advancement and personal experience values that ultimately produced choices fundamentally misaligned with principles you and Dad instilled throughout childhood. This opening, addressing patterns beyond particular incident, demonstrated continued reflection rather than considering the matter resolved through single conversation without substantive reorientation. The perspective suggested genuine assessment rather than performative reconciliation without authentic reconsideration of priority frameworks her choices had revealed through Disney prioritization and subsequent deception. I'm not claiming immediate value realignment. She continued with honesty that prioritized authenticity over comfortable harmony without substantive foundation, but recognizing disconnect between intellectual acknowledgement of family support principles and practical implementation patterns that recent circumstances exposed through direct priority comparison impossible to rationalize or justify despite elaborate attempts at doing exactly that. This self-awareness, acknowledging gap between intellectual recognition and practical implementation, created foundation for potential authentic connection rather than superficial harmony without genuine alignment. By accepting realistic assessment without premature resolution claims, Jessica demonstrated maturity beyond defensive positioning or performative reconciliation without substantive reorientation. Whatever relationship we develop moving forward needs foundation in actual values rather than presumed alignment recent circumstances have demonstrated doesn't currently exist, she concluded thoughtfully. I'm working toward potential reprioritization that might eventually create greater consistency between acknowledged principles and practical choices. But honest assessment seems more important than premature harmony claims without substantive foundation. This perspective, prioritizing authentic engagement over performative closeness, represented significant maturity beyond defensive justification or superficial reconciliation without genuine reorientation. By acknowledging current reality while remaining open to potential development, Jessica created possibility for meaningful relationship based on actual priorities rather than presumed alignment her choices had demonstrated didn't presently exist. As our dinner conversation continued through practical implementation possibilities, I recognized transformation extending beyond our immediate family situation into broader understanding about values transmission across generations and relationship. Authenticity beyond performative harmony without substantive connection. The painful discovery of Jessica's Disney World prioritization during my brain surgery had ultimately created opportunity for honest assessment that superficial interaction patterns might never have necessitated without circumstances forcing direct priority comparison impossible to rationalize despite elaborate attempts. 6 months later, as seasons changed and recovery completed within expected progression timeline, our family relationships had established new patterns based on honest assessment rather than presumed alignment circumstances had demonstrated didn't genuinely exist. Jessica's actions showed gradual recalibration through consistent small choices, prioritizing presence over convenience, regular visits despite professional demands, genuine attendance during significant moments, transparent communication about actual priorities rather than performative harmony without substantive foundation. Michael maintained balanced perspective throughout this evolution, neither dismissing significant disconnect Jessica's choices had revealed, nor preventing potential relationship development through rigid judgment without recognition of human complexity. His consistent support during my surgery and recovery had demonstrated family presence values in action, rather than merely conceptual principles, creating powerful comparison that intellectual justification couldn't rationalize despite elaborate attempts at constructing acceptable narratives about priority choices. The accidental discovery that had revealed Jessica's Disney World attendance during my brain surgery had ultimately created opportunity for authentic assessment that comfortable patterns might never have necessitated without circumstances forcing direct priority comparison impossible to explain through conventional justifications. The physical therapist's coincidental Tower of Terror recognition had collapsed elaborate fiction that might otherwise have maintained artificial harmony without addressing fundamental disconnects between acknowledged principles and practical implementations. 1 year after surgery, during family dinner celebrating complete recovery and successful return to volunteer activities, Jessica offered perspective that demonstrated continued reflection beyond specific incident into deeper understanding about values and relationships. The Disney decision and subsequent exposure created painful but necessary reassessment, she acknowledged without prompting, forcing recognition of priority patterns that wouldn't have been directly confronted without circumstances creating comparison impossible to rationalize despite elaborate attempts. This voluntary acknowledgement, without defensive positioning or minimizing significance, indicated genuine integration rather than temporary accommodation without substantive reconsideration. By recognizing transformative impact beyond specific incident, Jessica demonstrated authentic engagement with fundamental questions her choices had raised about values and priorities. Relationship harmony had previously obscured through comfortable patterns without direct priority comparison. Being caught at Disney during your brain surgery represents simultaneously worst and best thing that could have happened regarding my value development, she continued thoughtfully. Creating humiliation and shame through indefensible priority, exposure, but ultimately forcing honest assessment that comfortable patterns might never have necessitated without circumstances creating comparison impossible to explain through conventional justifications. This perspective, finding development opportunity within painful exposure, demonstrated maturity beyond defensive positioning or superficial reconciliation without authentic reorientation. By recognizing transformative potential within embarrassing circumstances, Jessica indicated capacity for genuine growth rather than merely damage control without substantive reconsideration of priority frameworks her choices had revealed. As our family continues navigating relationship patterns based on actual priorities rather than presumed alignment circumstances demonstrated didn't genuinely exist, I occasionally reflect on remarkable coincidence that created this transformation opportunity through completely unexpected channels. The statistical improbability of physical therapist's Disney World vacation intersecting precisely with Jessica's Tower of Terror attendance suggests almost narrative intervention beyond rational explanation, coincidental connection creating exposure that elaborate deception couldn't prevent despite comprehensive fictional construction designed specifically to avoid discovery. The daughter who chose Disney World over being present during her mother's brain surgery ultimately faced accountability through channels no amount of careful planning could have anticipated or prevented. The coincidental exposure created opportunity for honest assessment that comfortable patterns might never have necessitated without circumstances forcing direct priority comparison impossible to rationalize despite elaborate attempts at constructing acceptable narratives about choices that prioritized entertainment over family support during literally life-threatening medical procedure. Whatever relationship continues developing through honest engagement rather than performative harmony without substantive foundation. The accidental discovery created authentic assessment opportunity that polite avoidance might never have facilitated without circumstances creating direct comparison impossible to explain through conventional justifications. Being caught at Disney during brain surgery ultimately produced painful but necessary examination of value frameworks that comfortable interaction patterns had previously obscured through presumed alignment without direct priority, conflict exposing fundamental disconnects between acknowledged principles and practical implementations. The title that once seemed merely provocative. My daughter ditched me during brain surgery for a work trip, but I caught her at Disney. Ultimately represents transformative journey beyond specific incident into deeper understanding about values, presence, and authentic connection beyond performative harmony without substantive foundation. Through unexpected channels beyond anyone's planning or control, fundamental priorities received examination that comfortable patterns might never have necessitated without circumstances creating comparison impossible to rationalize despite elaborate attempts at constructing acceptable narratives about choices that violated core principles. Everyone involved recognized intellectually, even when not implementing practically. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.